So it's been about 2 days since I worked on this truck last, and I thought now is probably a good time to pick up the camera and start working on it again. As you can see here, the next thing that we're going to be doing is the shocks, and then we'll be moving towards the suspension links. I'm planning to fit all of this portion in this video, and we'll see how much time we have afterwards if we're going to do the drive shafts in this same video as well. But we really don't have a whole lot left to do to the chassis itself, although once it comes to these final pages here, then we get to the body, and there's actually quite a bit that needs to be done to the body because we have a ton of accessories, and I have not painted the body yet. I might end up doing that off camera or on camera. We'll see what happens, but I'm waiting on the paint right now because I needed to order the proper paint to paint it, so I haven't gotten that here yet. Once I get it and once it's warm enough, we'll go out and do that. But for right now, here is our dampers bag. Let's break this open and see what we've got. Okay, bringing in the dampers bag. We've got only a few components, not a whole lot that's going on in here. You can see here are all aluminum body shocks. The shock caps and the shock bottom, the rod ends are not metal, they're all plastic. So really the only aluminum on here is the body of the shock itself, but that's okay. We've got only 4 screws. Our springs, I'll show you guys how they're marked differently shortly here once we get to the instruction part of it. And then we've got our shock oil. I'm going to use this shock oil because I used it in the last kit and it's working fine for me, although I don't know what kind of weight it is. It does just fine though. So the first step to prep these shocks is to unscrew the shock cap so that way we can fill them with oil. So there's a small little gasket here and the shock cap just screws into there. We're going to pull the shaft out. So now we can start to pour in the shock oil. So I filled the shock mostly with oil. You can see it there on the top. Now what you want to do is you want to move the shock piston up and down to get the air out. And then we're going to leave it compressed as we put the cap on. So now that we have oil in our first shock, we can put the spring on. And I want to point out to you that each shock is different. There's 2 rear shocks and 2 front shocks, and what you can see here, hopefully on the camera, is there is a little white paint stripe on this shock, and then there's an orange one on this one. The orange signifies that it's a rear spring, and the white one signifies that it's a front spring, and you can actually see that the coil is a little bit different between the two. This one's got a little bit of a tighter coil, and this one's a little bit more open. So what we're going to do here is we're going to pull the bottom shock perch off of here, and then we're just going to put our orange spring and then put the perch back on. Just like so. So there we are. We've got 4 new shocks all assembled. You can see here we do have a little bit of shock oil left. Actually, we have quite a bit, about half a bottle that's left over. Right here on the manual is where you'll see what I was talking about with the color code of the springs. So we've got white for the front and orange for the rear. It also shows you how many millimeters the collar, the adjustable collar, should be tightened on the threaded part of the shock body. As you can see, I have it pretty much exactly the same as what they're saying. So about 5 millimeters on 3 of the shocks and 9 millimeters on the one that's for the front left side. My only guess is that it has something to do with the servo being located here closer to the left side and with the panhard bar coming to this left corner. So the next step is going to be doing some front axle preparation with the front drag link, and we're also going to start putting some suspension links on the axles. Let's do it. So we've got a bunch of different links here. These 4 look to be about the same. I know that these are going to go on the rear, so I'm going to set these on the side. We've got a few other shorter ones in here. I'm going to set these aside as well because what it looks like is that this one right here is going to be our drag link. You can see it has the curved rod ends. That's because those are going into the caster blocks that are on the front axle. So I'm going to go ahead and open up this package right here and pull out this drag link. And as you can see, all metal links The main rod is actually made out of metal. The rod ends are made out of plastic. If you remember earlier, I mentioned that the screws that are throughout the instructions are actually in a 1-to-1 scale. So this 3 by 27 millimeter screw is actually this size as it is on the page. However, Traxxas also makes all of the suspension links in a 1-to-1 scale. So right here, these front lower suspension links are actually the same size. And you can see as I'm holding it up, that's how I can determine that this is the exact length that I need, because there's so many links in the package that you don't know which one is which until you hold it up to the manual and see which one is the proper size. Okay, so we're going to install the steering link. It looks like it's going to go in this orientation. I'm going to put my drag link here into the caster block, and then we're going to drop this screw through here. Just like that. Make sure everything looks right, comparing it with the instructions before I screw it in. So now I've got a 15 millimeter screw, and I'm going to take my panhard bar, which is going to go in this orientation like so, and we're going to screw that into the front of the axle. And the last link that's going to go here is the front upper link, and that's going to go in this orientation right into the front of the axle as well. And we've got another 15 millimeter screw, and we're just going to tighten that up just like that. So this axle just got a lot heavier, but that's for a good reason. We've got all of our metal links and both of our front shocks hooked up. So now we're actually going to be putting it onto the chassis. So let's bring the chassis back in. So we're going to go ahead and lower the front axle into the chassis. And what I think will be easiest is if I screw in these two front links right here to the skid plate first. I think that'll help by securing the front axle to the chassis. Okay, and now for the front upper link, which is this guy right here. We've got a slightly longer screw that's going to go back through this side through the floor panel. And now for the front panhard bar, which is going to go through here, and there's two mounting positions for the panhard bar. I'm going to go with the one that is the default on the manual, which is the slightly lower position when the truck is flipped over, that is. So we're just going to stick that screw in there. And now for our two shocks, we're going to maneuver the ball that's on the shock cap to fit through our shock mount. And then we're going to stick the screw in and tighten it up. We do the exact same thing on the other side. And that lovely TRX-4 suspension. I'm going to tighten all these screws up, and then we're going to flip it over. Okay, so this is mostly all set up, except we need to do the steering link. Now, once again, in the screws, there is going to be one 3 by 15 millimeter screw that has a little bit of blue Loctite, and that's going to be the one that's designated for the steering link. So we're going to go ahead and put it through the steering link and then up into the servo horn. I'm going to turn it on its side so I can tighten it. And there we are. The front axle is now completely attached to our chassis, It looks great. It feels great. Those shocks feel absolutely wonderful. Now we're going to move on to the rear axle. So the rear axle is a little bit less complex than the front one because we don't have quite as many links, including the panhard bar and the steering link. What we've got here are the rear upper links, and these ones have a slightly curved rod end here compared to the lower links that are completely straight. So these ones are going to go up here on the top of the rear axle, and I just want to make sure I've got the proper orientation, which I do. And now for the lower links. So we're going to take a lower link, we're going to put it here in the suspension link mount, and then we're going to take one of our rear shocks and we're going to thread the screw through that and then through the mount and into the rear suspension link. And now we're going to take our rear axle assembly and we got to drop it into the chassis just like we did with the front. And what we've got here is these links right here. Let me bring this a little closer into the frame. These links are going to cross over each other. So these upper ones are going to go to the outer mounting points on the skid plate, and then these lower ones are going to cross under and they're going to go to the center mounting points. So we're going to start with this rear upper link, which we're going to put right here in this mounting point. And then what we do over here is we cross the lower links over the upper links. So we're going to put a 3x15mm screw through to this lower link, just like that. We'll do the same thing for the other side. Now the last part of this is to do the shocks. So there we go. We've got both axles and all the shocks mounted up to the chassis. The front shocks feel really nice and soft. They really feel perfect. But the rear is a little bit springier than what I like. If you see there, they're kind of springy, so I might need to make some adjustments with that. Like I mentioned earlier, the springs are different than the front. So I don't know exactly what they intended to do with that. I guess because there's more weight in the rear with the battery, that they wanted a little bit extra tension back here to keep it from sagging, which I understand. Hopefully this springiness is okay on the trail, but we'll see. Only 13 minutes long? Yeah, let's do the drive shafts. So I just want to include this part in this video. So what we've got down here is all of our drive shaft components along with some screws over here. These are metal CV cups. This is pretty cool because these are nice and strong, and I'm glad to see that these are in metal. But the main drive shaft portions are just made out of plastic. And with a little bit of maneuvering, now I've got those pins together, and I'm going to slide the CV pin retainer over, and that's going to keep everything connected and everything from sliding out. This will be connected to one of the output shafts on either the axle or the transmission. And this process is basically going to be repeated 4 times. I'm not going to record all of it. What I am going to point out though is that there are 2 different sizes of half shafts. There's one long and then there's 3 short ones. and the one long one is going to go for the rear. That's clearly stated in the instructions, but I just want to point that out, that there is a different size of half shaft for the rear. So what it says here is that the stock pins should be installed parallel to each other when the half shafts are connected. And what they mean by that is to make sure that the pins are in the same position. So what we want to do is actually install the male half shaft portion, and what you can see right here is there is a small groove that is in the female half shaft portion, and what you're going to want to do is to make sure that the groove on the other half is in the same orientation. So you can see that there's one groove here and the other one here. Let me find something that's really pointy to point at it. Right there, there's a groove, and now they are parallel to each other in the same orientation. So just make sure that you do that, so that way everything runs properly and that you don't get any binding of the drive shafts. Okay, so I'm going to bring in our chassis. I'm going to flip it over. And now what we're going to do is we're going to install our drive shafts. So the longer one is obviously going to go in the rear, and the shorter one's going to go up front. And then we're going to take our very small screw pins and we're going to screw the drive shafts into the output shafts on the axle and the transmission. Alright, so the drive shafts are now in. I'm just going to turn one of them and make sure that everything spins smoothly. I can see that my wheel hexes are rotating as well in the proper direction. Everything feels good. Everything's nice and strong. Let's flip it over and just admire this for a minute. Everything is fantastic. Everything has gone together with ease. Guys, I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, be sure to give it a like. The next part, we're going to focus on all of the final chassis and the body components. Hopefully, I'll have the body paint here soon, and we'll go ahead and start painting the body, do all the body accessories. The only thing left to do on the chassis is the bumpers and the rock sliders, as well as the body mounts. So we're going to fit all of that into the final episode, and then very soon we're going to get this truck on the trail. Thanks so much for watching, everyone, and I'll see you guys in the next one.